My fiancé didn't want me to meet her parents and said they wouldn't be at the wedding. So I secretly went to see them, and what I found changed everything. 3 months before my wedding, I realized there was one enormous hole in the life I thought I knew. I had never met my fiancé's parents. At first, it didn't seem strange. Emily had told me they lived several states away and preferred to stay out of everyone's lives. She rarely talked about them, and whenever I asked, she would gently change the subject. "I'll tell you someday," she'd whisper with a sad smile. I loved her enough to respect her boundaries. Or at least I thought I did. We'd been together for almost 4 years. We'd survived job losses, long-distance months, financial stress, and countless ordinary days that slowly turned two strangers into best friends. Emily was kind, funny, thoughtful. She remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every tiny detail that made people feel important. But there was one chapter of her life that remained completely locked away. Her family. Whenever friends asked whether her parents were excited about the wedding, she'd simply say, "They won't be coming." No explanation, no emotion, just those 4 words. At first, everyone assumed they were elderly or ill. Later, they assumed there had been some family disagreement. Neither explanation seemed to fit. One evening, while finalizing the seating chart, my mother asked an innocent question. "So how many seats should we save for Emily's side of the family?" Emily froze. The smile disappeared from her face. None. The room became painfully quiet. My mother immediately apologized, but the damage had already been done. Emily excused herself and locked herself in the bathroom for nearly an hour. When she finally came out, her eyes were red. "I hate disappointing people," she whispered. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I doubted Emily. Because I felt like I didn't truly know the woman I was about to marry. Over the following weeks, little details began to stand out. She never answered unknown phone numbers. She had no childhood photographs displayed anywhere in our apartment. Every holiday was spent with my family. Whenever someone mentioned parents, she quietly left the conversation. Then came the envelope. It arrived on a rainy Tuesday. No return address. Emily saw it before I did. The color drained from her face. Without opening it, she carried it straight outside and burned it in the barbecue grill. I stared at her. What was that? Nothing. It didn't look like nothing. It was junk. "You burned junk mail." She avoided my eyes. "I don't want to talk about it." That answer only made my curiosity worse. A week later I accidentally discovered something else. Emily had left her laptop open while taking a shower. I wasn't snooping. I only meant to close it. But an email notification appeared on the screen. The subject line read, "Please come home." It had been sent only 2 days earlier. The sender's last name matched Emily's. Before I could read another word, she walked into the room. She looked at the screen. Then at me. For a split second, pure panic crossed her face. She quickly closed the laptop. "I wish you hadn't seen that." "Who sent it?" "No one." It obviously wasn't no one. She sat beside me and held my hand. "There are parts of my past that I never wanted to bring into our future. You can tell me anything." "I know. But not yet." That answer haunted me. Not yet. What did that even mean? As the wedding drew closer, my anxiety grew. I wasn't looking for perfection. I simply wanted honesty. One Saturday afternoon, while searching for extra candles in the hallway closet, I found an old storage box. Inside were forgotten documents, notebooks, and receipts. Near the bottom lay a faded birthday card. The envelope had never been thrown away. It contained an address belonging to Emily's parents. I stared at it for several minutes. My heart raced. I knew I should put it back. I knew looking any further would betray her trust. But another voice whispered a different question. What if she's hiding something that could affect both of us? For 3 days I carried that address folded inside my wallet. Every time I reached for my driver's license, I saw it. Every time I looked at it, I promised myself I'd throw it away. I never did. Finally, on a Friday morning, Emily left early for a work conference. She would be gone until Sunday evening. I stood in our kitchen for almost an hour. Coffee growing cold, keys in my hand. My conscience begged me to stay home. Instead, I got into my car. The address was nearly 3 hours away. The closer I got, the more nervous I became. Maybe I'd find nothing. Maybe her parents truly wanted no contact. Maybe I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The neighborhood surprised me. It wasn't run down. It wasn't abandoned. It was peaceful. Children rode bicycles along tree-lined streets. Neighbors waved at each other. Flowers bloomed in carefully tended gardens. Nothing looked frightening. Nothing looked like the place Emily had always seemed desperate to escape. I parked across the street from a modest white house with blue shutters. The lawn was neatly trimmed. Wind chimes gently swayed on the front porch. An elderly golden retriever slept beneath a maple tree. Everything looked normal. I almost turned around. Then the front door opened. A gray-haired woman stepped outside carrying a watering can. She smiled warmly at the flowers before noticing me. For a second she simply stared. The watering can slipped from her hand and crashed onto the porch. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Her lips trembled. She whispered just one sentence. You're marrying my daughter, aren't you? My heart stopped. Before I could answer, another voice came from inside the house. Who's there? A man appeared behind her. The moment he saw me, his face turned completely pale. Then he said 7 words that changed everything. She told you we were dead, didn't she? For several seconds, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind chime gently tapping against the porch roof. I looked from the woman to the man, trying to understand what I'd just heard. Finally, I managed to speak. What did you say? The older man sighed heavily. I asked if Emily told you we were dead. I swallowed. No. His expression changed from surprise to confusion. No, she only said you wouldn't come to the wedding. She never said you had passed away. The woman wiped tears from her cheeks. Thank goodness. She stepped closer but stopped a few feet away, almost afraid I'd disappear. I'm Sarah, she said softly. Emily's mother. And I'm David. I introduced myself. The moment I said my name, Sarah covered her mouth. So it's really happening, she whispered. She's getting married. There was joy in her voice, but also heartbreak. David invited me inside. The house felt warm and lived in. Family photos covered nearly every wall. Birthday parties, vacations, graduations. Then I noticed something. Emily appeared in dozens of the photographs. She looked happy, really happy. As a little girl she was laughing on a swing. At 12 she was holding a science fair trophy. At 16 she was hugging her parents after what looked like a school play. None of it matched the picture I'd imagined. I turned toward David. I don't understand. Neither do we. He sat quietly before continuing. 5 years ago, Emily walked out of this house. Why? We've been asking ourselves that every day since. Sarah returned from the kitchen carrying 3 mugs of coffee. She handed me one with shaking hands. We've written letters, she said. Called, emailed, even drove to see her once. She wouldn't answer the door. My chest tightened. But why? Sarah exchanged a glance with David. It started after her younger brother died. I froze. Brother? You didn't know she had a brother? I slowly shook my head. Emily had never mentioned having any siblings. Sarah disappeared down the hallway and returned carrying a framed photograph. A smiling teenage boy stood between his parents. Emily stood beside him, laughing as he made a silly face. His name was Noah. He was 17. What happened? David stared into his coffee for a long time. A drunk driver. The police called us just after midnight. Sarah's voice cracked. Our family never recovered. The room fell silent. I remembered every conversation I'd ever had with Emily. Not once had she mentioned Noah. Not once. I don't understand, I finally said. Why would she hide all this? David rubbed his forehead. Because grief changes people. Sometimes it breaks them. Sometimes it convinces them that running away is easier than staying. Sarah reached into a drawer beside the couch. She pulled out a thick stack of envelopes. Every one of them had been returned unopened. Each was addressed to Emily. See for yourself. I carefully looked through them. Some were birthday cards. Others were Christmas letters. One simply read, "We miss you." Every envelope carried the same postal stamp. Return to sender. My stomach sank. You really kept trying. Every month. For 5 years. I wanted to believe them. Everything I saw suggested they were telling the truth. Yet something didn't fit. Emily wasn't cruel. She wasn't someone who abandoned people without reason. There has to be more. David nodded. There is. He walked toward a bookshelf and removed an old photo album. Inside were dozens of newspaper clippings. One article described the fatal accident that claimed Noah's life. Another mentioned the sentencing of the drunk driver. Then David pointed to a folded newspaper tucked into the final page. This is where everything changed. The headline wasn't about Noah. It was about David. The article explained that, months after his son's death, David had become addicted to prescription pain medication following surgery. His addiction spiraled. He eventually lost his job. There had been one arrest for driving under the influence. He completed rehabilitation and remained sober afterward. David looked at me without making excuses. I was a terrible husband. A terrible father. I wasn't violent, but I wasn't present. I spent almost a year buried in addiction. Sarah quietly added. Emily blamed herself. She believed that if Noah hadn't died, David would never have fallen apart. David nodded. She carried guilt that never belonged to her. When I finally got clean, she had already built walls around herself. I begged her to stay. But she left. Everything suddenly became more complicated. Neither side seemed completely innocent. Neither side seemed completely guilty. Then Sarah stood and walked upstairs. She returned holding a small gift box wrapped in faded blue paper. We've been saving this. She carefully handed it to me. It's for Emily. Every year we thought, maybe this would be the Christmas she came home. Inside the box was a delicate silver necklace. Attached was a tiny, handwritten note. For our daughter. No matter how much time passes, there will always be a place for you at our table. I felt a lump form in my throat. As I closed the box, a loud knock echoed through the house. Everyone looked toward the front door. David frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. He opened it. A middle-aged woman stood outside. The moment she noticed me, her expression changed. She pointed directly at me. You shouldn't be here. The room fell silent. She looked at Sarah and David with obvious anger. Have you told him your version yet? Sarah's face went pale. What are you doing here, Linda? Linda folded her arms. I'm making sure this young man hears the whole truth. She turned back to me. If you're going to marry Emily, you deserve to know what happened the end. No one moved. The silence in the living room felt heavier than before. Linda stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. She looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and determination. I know this is difficult, she said. But if you're about to marry Emily, you deserve the complete story, not just the version anyone wants you to hear. David sighed deeply. We never said we were perfect. No, Linda replied, but you also haven't told him everything. Sarah lowered her eyes. I could feel my heartbeat quicken. What happened the night Emily left? I asked. Linda sat across from me. It was 6 months after Noah died. Everyone in this family was grieving in different ways. She looked toward David. David had started drinking again after finishing rehab. Just once, he said. But once became several times. David didn't interrupt. Linda continued. Emily came home from work early that evening. She found her father drinking alone in the kitchen. Sarah quietly wiped away another tear. They argued, Linda said. It wasn't the first argument. But it became the last. I looked at David. Did you say something to her? He nodded slowly. I did. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I told her that every time I looked at her, I was reminded of Noah. The room became completely still. I didn't mean she was responsible, David continued. I meant they looked so much alike. I was broken, angry, and drunk. But that's not how Emily heard it. Sarah covered her face. She believed her father blamed her for Noah's death. David's eyes filled with tears. I tried to apologize the next morning. But she was gone. Linda looked at me. That sentence destroyed her. I remembered all the times Emily had struggled to accept compliments, all the moments she apologized for things that weren't her fault, all the nights she'd woken from nightmares but refused to explain them. Suddenly, those pieces began to fit together. But why didn't she tell me? I asked. Sarah answered softly, because some wounds are easier to hide than reopen. Linda nodded. Emily built a new life. A successful career, new friends. Then she met you. For the first time in years, she looked happy again. I stared at the family photographs on the wall. So both sides have been living with the same pain. No one stopped loving anyone. They just stopped talking. David stood and walked toward a cabinet. From the top drawer he removed a small wooden box. I've been waiting years for the chance to give this back to her. Inside was an old silver key. What is it? I asked. The key to her childhood room. Sarah smiled sadly. We never changed it. Her books are still there. So are her paintings. And every birthday card she ever made for us. I couldn't speak. Everything I'd imagined before driving here had been wrong. There was no dark family secret. No hidden crime. No shocking conspiracy. Just years of grief, guilt, pride, and silence. As the afternoon turned into evening, I thanked them for telling me everything. Before leaving, Sarah stopped me at the front door. Please don't force Emily to come back. I looked at her, surprised. If she's happy, that's enough for us. David nodded. Just tell her one thing. What? Tell her we've never stopped loving her. I promised I would. The drive home felt much longer than the drive there. I replayed every conversation with Emily over the past 4 years. Every avoided question, every sad smile, every unfinished sentence. She hadn't been trying to deceive me. She'd been protecting herself from memories she wasn't ready to face. When I finally pulled into our driveway, I noticed another car parked outside. Emily's conference wasn't supposed to end until tomorrow. My stomach tightened. I stepped inside. The house was quiet. Then I heard her voice from the living room. "You went to see them." It wasn't a question. She already knew. She stood beside the window, still wearing her work clothes. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying for hours. "I found the address," I admitted. "I'm sorry." For several seconds she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Did they tell you I abandoned them?" "They told me they loved you." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "And did they tell you what my father said that night?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. "I've heard those words every single day for 5 years." I walked toward her. "He said he regretted them." "I know." Her answer caught me off guard. "You know." She nodded. "He wrote hundreds of letters. I read every one." I stared at her in disbelief. "But they all came back unopened." Emily looked at me sadly. "Not all of them." She walked upstairs. A minute later she returned carrying a worn cardboard box. Inside were dozens of carefully folded letters. Every envelope had already been opened. "I never answered," she whispered. "I wasn't ready." She picked up the very first letter. "I've read this one at least 100 times." She handed it to me. The first line read, "Dear Emily, I will spend the rest of my life wishing I could take back one sentence." I looked up. Emily was crying openly now. I wanted to forgive them. I just didn't know how. I gently took her hand. "Maybe we can figure it out together." She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "Do you think, after everything, they'd still want to come to our wedding?" I smiled. "I don't think they ever stopped hoping." Emily nodded through tears. "Then maybe it's finally time to go home." The next morning, neither of us spoke much. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the box of letters she'd kept hidden for 5 years. She traced the edges of one envelope with her fingertips before looking up at me. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of seeing them." She nodded. "What if nothing has changed? What if all the pain comes back the moment I walk through that door?" I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then we'll face it together." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she took a deep breath. "Let's go." The drive to her parents' house was quiet. Emily watched the passing trees through the window, lost in memories she hadn't shared with anyone. As we turned onto her old street, her breathing became shallow. "I used to ride my bike here every afternoon," she whispered. "Mrs. Carter always gave us lemonade in the summer." The neighborhood looked exactly as it had the day before. Only this time, Emily wasn't hiding from it. She was coming home. David was watering flowers when he noticed our car. The watering can slipped from his hands. He froze. Sarah opened the front door after hearing the noise. The moment she saw Emily standing beside me, she covered her mouth. No one moved. No one spoke. 5 years of silence stood between them. Then Sarah slowly walked down the porch steps. She stopped a few feet away. "Hi, sweetheart." Emily's lips trembled. "Hi, Mom." Sarah burst into tears. She wrapped her daughter in the tightest hug either of them had ever shared. Emily held on just as tightly. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "I missed you every single day." "I missed you too," Emily cried. David remained standing near the porch, unable to move. Emily looked at him. For a moment, the old hurt returned to her eyes. Then David took one hesitant step forward. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I only wanted one chance to tell you how deeply sorry I am." Emily looked at him through tears. "I believed you blamed me for Noah." David shook his head immediately. "Never. Not for 1 second. I blamed myself. I lost my son. Then I nearly lost my daughter. And I spent years wondering if I deserved either." Emily's shoulders began to shake. "I carried those words with me every day. I know. If I could erase that night, I would. I can't. But I can spend the rest of my life proving those words were never true." For several seconds, Emily simply stared at him. Then she walked forward. David broke down the moment she hugged him. The years of regret seemed to disappear in that single embrace. The afternoon became a conversation none of them thought they'd ever have. They talked about Noah. They laughed over childhood memories. They cried over missed birthdays, Christmases, and ordinary moments that could never be replaced. No one tried to pretend the past hadn't happened. Instead, They chose to face it together. Healing didn't erase the pain. It simply made room for hope. 3 weeks later, our wedding day arrived. The ceremony was held in a small garden filled with white roses. Friends and family gathered under a clear blue sky. This time, 2 extra seats weren't empty. Sarah and David sat proudly in the front row. When Emily walked down the aisle, her father didn't give her away. She asked both of her parents to walk beside her. "It took all 3 of us to get here," she told them. "There isn't one person who deserves this moment more than another." As they reached the altar, I saw tears in almost every guest's eyes. During the reception, David stood to give a toast. He looked at Emily before speaking. "There was a time I believed broken families stayed broken forever." He smiled gently. "I've never been happier to be wrong." He turned toward me. "Thank you for loving our daughter. And thank you for reminding all of us that pride keeps families apart far longer than truth ever should." The room erupted in applause. Later that evening, Emily and I slipped outside for a quiet moment beneath the stars. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "You know," she said, smiling, "I spent years trying to protect myself from one painful sentence. And today I realized something." "What?" "Love doesn't erase the past. It gives you the courage to stop running from it." She looked back through the reception hall windows. Inside, her parents were laughing with my family. For the first time in years, everyone she loved was in the same room. Exactly where they'd always belonged. She squeezed my hand. "I think Noah would have liked today." "I think so too." We stood there in silence, listening to the music drifting out into the warm evening air. Some stories end with a shocking secret. Ours ended with something far more powerful. A family that found its way back to one another, not because the past disappeared, but because they finally chose forgiveness over fear. And sometimes, that's the greatest ending of all.